Welcome to AK Anime Explainer. Today is explanation of Soul Land 3, Legend of the Dragon King Part 161. Without any delay, start explanation. In the next instant, Wu Zhongkong was already in the air. Tang Wulin's body shook when the tendrils of blue-silver grass as thick as arms swung upward with great force and took all his companions out of the coach. It was not only the team from Shrek Academy. His blue-silver grass also covered the flustered students of the Royal Star Luo Academy. The students of Shrek Academy had cooperated with him and sprung upward immediately. The students of Royal Star Luo Academy, on the other hand, were pulled out of the coach by Tang Wulin's sheer strength alone. At that moment, a peculiar sight appeared on the Soul train. A clean, white and chilly figure rose skyward while pulling on someone. The person in his grasp was releasing numerous dark bluish vines while he carried another group of people under him. This was the evolution of Tang Wulin's martial soul. With the tensile strength of the blue-silver grass previously, if he wanted to pull this many people out, he would have had to rely purely on the power of his arms. It might have been impossible for him to accomplish this feat. Right after they had jumped out of the coach, sounds of violent roars came from under them. Those were clearly soul cannonballs raining down on the Soul train. There were as many as 100 mechas flying from that direction. The leading mecha was a glaring red. However, it was different from Mu Yi's red mecha. This red mecha was in the form of a goshawk. It spread its wings and moved at an incredible speed. Almost simultaneously with the explosion, it had appeared on top of the Soul train. The violent explosion had turned all the coaches of the Soul train upside down. Flames rose into the air, and with a loud roar, shrapnel scattered and flew everywhere. This express train was commuting a large number of diplomatic corps members from the Luo continent. After they entered the Star Luo continent, although they had parted ways at the seaside city, at least half of them were headed toward Star Luo city, and they were all on this Soul train. Just then another strange scene occurred. Layers of silver light emanated from the rolling Soul train. The flames from the explosion were quickly snuffed out. After a series of spins in midair, the Soul train crashed into the ground, but it did so while enveloped in the silver light. The explosion mostly affected the train's surface. Although the train itself had suffered quite a lot of damage, it was not broken into pieces as their attackers imagined it would be. Shortly after, a column of brilliant and dazzling silver light suddenly blasted into the sky. It headed straight toward the red mecha as it shot forth explosively. The red mecha was too fast. Like an illusory image in the sky, it flashed and materialized a few hundred meters away as it dodged the column of silver light. The roof of the train broke open, and throngs of people scrambled to get out. Just then, soul rays of various colors shone brightly and a fleet of mechas dashed out swiftly from within the Soul train. It was the Star Luo Empire mecha escort which was tasked to protect the diplomatic corps. They were mostly purple mechas, along with 4 black mechas, totaling 30 altogether. Soaring into the air, they shot beams of soul rays in unison to stop the enemies. All of the attacking mechas had the mark of a skull on their chests. The most striking feature of that skull was the pattern of green flames which burned within its sockets, giving them a very eerie appearance. Elder Cai rose into the air. A silver moon shone, and she locked her aura onto the enemy's divine mecha. It was because of her protection that the Soul train had not met with a catastrophic disaster. Even so, there were many diplomatic corps members injured when the Soul train began rolling. Tang Wulin gritted his teeth and looked at Xie Xie. "You've jinxed it." Xie Xie said with an innocent expression, "Captain, it's not me who jinxed it. It's your own bad luck." Wu Zhongkong said coldly, "Stop talking nonsense. Protect yourselves. Go have a look at the coaches and rescue the civilians." It was impossible that all of the people on the train would be Soul Masters. Whether it was the staff or the general passengers, they were all ordinary humans. After the horrific rolling of the train just now, their fates were still unknown. By this time, the crowd of people had already got onto the ground. Shrek Academy's 8 students quickly went into formation. Tang Wulin stood at the forefront with Yuan and Yehui and Yi Xinglan. Yu Zhengyu and Xie Xie were beside him, Ji Yu at his back, with Xu Xiaoyuan and Xu Lixi at the rear. "Let's go." "We are going to rescue the passengers," Tang Wulin called out and led the group as they ran toward the Seoul train. The Royal Star Luo Academy's students had just been released by the blue-silver grass and had yet to completely calm down. Some appeared confused, while others looked terrified. It was obvious that they had never experienced such a situation before. Tang Wulin was clearly the most calm among all of them. Even though the situation before his eyes did not appear optimistic, at least they had with them the Hyperdole or Elder CAI, who had assumed personal command. With her presence, there was no need to concern themselves with the enemy's Red Divine Mecha. Even though the opponent's numbers were extremely high, they had a large amount of Soul Masters on their side and they had the Star Luo Empire's Mecha Brigade as well. It would not be easy, but they were still capable of defending themselves. The only thing that made him slightly puzzled was that Mu Yi was not in the diplomatic corps. When they had just arrived on the Star Luo continent, Mu Yi informed Tang Wulin that he was going to travel around, and that he would come looking for Tang Wulin in the Star Luo Empire's capital. Otherwise, who were these enemies in teacher Mu Yi's presence? Ever since Tang Wulin witnessed Mu Yi's battle previously, he had been meticulously analyzing Mu Yi's capabilities. Teacher Mu Yi was definitely more powerful than Elder CAI based on the body sect special abilities alone. On Duoluo continent, he was at the pinnacle. Would he never be able to simply take the Soul train? In his heart, Tang Wulin felt depressed. He never had a smooth trip on the Soul train. Meanwhile, he had already arrived at the front of the damaged train. Golden light flashed on his body as his right arm swiftly enlarged. Scales covered almost his entire torso and right arm. His bloodline power was released, which enabled him to grab onto the side of the train with his golden dragon claw. With one swift jerk he tore a hole into it. "There's a window too?" Yuan and Yehui could not help but say it upon seeing Tang Wulin's roughness. She threw a punch and shattered the window, then she jumped into the train too. "Xinglan, Jingyu, stay on the outside to guard against any new attacks. Lishi and Xiaoyan will work together with both of you. Yu, stay on the outside too. Xie, come in and join Yuan and me in saving the passengers." Tang Wulin distributed his group members in a simple manner, then he was the first to rush into the Soul train. The inside of the Soul train was in a scattered mess after the overturn. Countless pieces of broken cutlery and window glass covered the place. There were also many bloodstains. By following the sound of their moaning, Tang Wulin soon found 2 casualties. He immediately picked them up and dashed out of the Soul train. Yi Xinglan and Xu Lishi separately received the casualties and took them a safe distance away. The Royal Star Luo Academy's students had come to grips with the situation by now and ran over to offer help. Before they managed to reach, they could see that there were a few soul cannons that shot past their defensive line and were flying toward them in the distance. "Oh no! It's a soul cannon!" A female Royal Star Luo Academy student gasped in surprise. She then saw a flash of silver light. Standing outside of the train, Gu suddenly vanished and instantly reappeared on its roof. 4 soul rings rose up as the elemental staff in Gu's hand bloomed a dazzling radiance. The jewel on the tip of the staff transformed into an oddly alluring blue color. Balls of blue flames shot out and flew toward the soul cannons. Yi Xinglan flew up to the top of the train with the Star God sword in her hand. She stood guard by Gu's side. Shockwaves roared toward them as the soul cannons exploded in midair. Speckles of starlight interweaved into a large net, shielding Gu and Yi Xinglan from the impact of the shockwave. Yu Jingyu was slower than Yi Xinglan by 1 step, but he had already arrived at the top of the train. The 3 of them stood side by side. Gu's elemental staff was akin to a soul artillery battery. Streams of light shimmered. The blue fireballs had the strongest attack power, the sword flew the furthest, and the colossal icicle had the strongest penetrating force. Long-range attacks of numerous attributes kept pouring out to block the soul cannons. The soul beam-type attacks that occasionally made it through were all blocked by Yi Xinglan and Yu Jingyu. "Move sideways to the left side of the car." Tang Wulin's voice came from below. The 3 of them rapidly moved toward that side. This meant that they had already completed the rescue in the earlier car. Work with them to save the passengers, the Royal Star Luo Academy's captain shouted softly. He helped Shrek Academy's group move the casualties saved by Tang Wulin away from the crash site. Meanwhile, the battle in the sky grew more and more intense. Red and silver lights flared at the highest altitude. The color of the sky was constantly changing as the two top powerhouses collided into each other. On the other hand, the situation on the main battlefield was not as optimistic. The incoming enemies were apparently fully prepared. Their firepower was strong, and their mecha's overall power was extremely strong as well. Other than the red mecha, there were 8 more black mechas, over 30 purple and more than 100 yellow. The mecha party which they formed launched violent attacks. Even though Star Luo Empire's mecha brigade were valiant fighters, they were being overpowered by the enemy. There were just too many of them. As a result, they only managed to hold back a fraction of the enemy attacks. There were 7 soul masters with cultivation bases of 7 soul rings or more within the diplomatic corps, but even with all of them combined, they were still less effective than Wu Zhongkong alone, who was already suited in his sky ice battle armor. Wu Zhongkong released his powers effortlessly in the sky. The Sky Frost sword in his hand became gigantic and stopped a large number of long-range attacks. From that distance, he was trying his best to guard Shrek Academy's group below. Given the current situation, it was impossible for them to launch a counterattack. Merely blocking the opponent was already taxing enough. The firepower of over 100 mechas could not be described as simply violent anymore. The entire surrounding area was blanketed by the terrifying energy fluctuation. Boom! A soul cannon finally managed to cross the barrier and exploded on a car that was farther away from Tang Wulin's group. At once, fire erupted from it, while the horrendous explosion violently shook the other cars. Tang Wulin and the rest had already saved dozens of the train's passengers. "Wulin, we can't hold on anymore. Come out quick!" Gu shouted below as she stood on the top of the train. A few mechas of the Star Luo Empire's mecha brigade had already been destroyed. The situation was becoming worse by the minute. Although the enemy's eagle-shaped red mecha was slightly weaker than Elder CAI's, it was incredibly fast. Moreover, it was extremely incisive with its attacks on Elder CAI. She could not free herself from its assault even for a moment. The 2 hyper powerhouses were well above the turmoil on the ground. Had they not been, the fallout of their battle could have been catastrophic. Tang Wulin saved 2 more passengers from the car. There were still 5 more cars that they had not searched. At this point they could give up, turn around and flee. With their abilities they could easily survive. But there were innocent lives at stake. Tang Wulin took a glance at the sky and shouted, "Everyone prepare to fall back." At the same time, he took something from his chest pocket and quickly made use of it. As he was shouting at the group to retreat, he had already dashed to the other car. At that moment, the battle was taking a turn for the worse. The enemy mechas fired rapidly from a distance, but they were finally done with long-range attacks. Having already pinned down the diplomatic corps brigade, the mechas pulled out their close combat weapons in succession as they dashed forth at full speed. Their sheer numbers gave them such an overwhelming advantage that they could defeat even higher-ranking opponents. Wu Zhongkong's icy cold voice echoed from the sky, "Fall back. Take the casualties as you leave." As he spoke, the sky ice battle armor emerged with a blinding white light, while he floated toward the opponent like a gust of snow. The enlarged sky frost sword glowed brightly as icy blue light rays were pulled out of the sky. Having witnessed Wu Zhongkong's power, the enemy sent 2 black mechas to subdue him immediately. Most black mechas were around 8 meters tall, but those of the Star Luo Empires were quite different from the Doluo continents. The 2 mechas flying toward Wu Zhongkong resembled a giant bear and an ape. The ape-like black mecha was only 5 meters tall, but it appeared to be tremendously nimble. It had 2 pairs of different-sized folding wings on its back, with a jet burner on top of each wing. It seemed exceedingly agile under the movements of these 2 pairs of wings. On the other hand, the giant bear mecha was over 20 meters tall, and it seemed to be unusually full of power and grandeur. It was enshrouded in a dark purple protective shield with a gigantic battle axe in its hands over 20 meters long. Without a doubt one of these was a strength model, while the other was an agile model. The giant bear dashed ahead, the battle axe waving wildly. Despite its heavy and bulky physique, it swung the battle axe, which brought out a series of afterimages in the air. A streak of pitch-black light crossed hundreds of meters in an instant directly toward Wu Zhongkong. Wu Zhongkong's figure suddenly turned vaporous. The sky ice battle armor on his body exuded a dreamlike glow as strands of silver turned into frost, shooting outward from his body. The black radiance cut through nothing, as though Wu Zhongkong transformed himself into an icy mist that could not be held down. With a brilliant flash, Wu Zhongkong appeared in the sky above the giant bear mecha. All the frost gathered in an instant and rolled toward the opponent like an enormous net. The giant bear mecha was so great in size, it had nowhere to dodge. However, the protective shield it had equipped put up a powerful defense. Streaks of bright purple light shot out where the dark purple barrier was struck by the frosty mist. It remained thick and sturdy without any sign of breaking. Meanwhile, a figure silently appeared at Wu Zhongkong's back at that exact moment. Two 2-meter-long daggers dropped down and slashed directly toward his back. It was the ape mecha moving very swiftly. While the giant bear mecha and Wu Zhongkong collided with each other face to face, it seemed to become illusory and then appeared behind Wu Zhongkong. This was the most terrifying killer-type mecha on the battlefield. Wu Zhongkong's body gracefully swayed. His movements were extremely agile. It was as if he had completely transformed into a shadow, while the Skyfrost sword in his hand turned translucent and dazzling. The shadow-like body vanished, and the ape mecha struck at nothing. Fast as lightning, the Skyfrost sword expanded and transformed into a circle of swords. This was Wu Zhongkong's fifth soul skill, the Frost Song Moon. One must fight and win battles decisively when faced with so many formidable enemies. Again and again, the giant sword slashed down with a loud thud. The sky was already filled with a radiant mist of ice. Streaks of bright light suddenly shot out from the giant bear mecha's back. Its purple protective shield's defense had achieved its extreme protection in an instant. Countless beams of light gushed out behind its back. Those were gun barrels. Due to the giant bear mecha's enormous body size, it was capable of storing more energy than an ordinary mecha. However, its enormous body size did not make it invulnerable to the attacks of the Frost Song Moon. Clang! At the sound, the black giant bear mecha was suddenly covered from head to toe in a layer of white frost. Wu Zhongkong then vanished into thin air, leaving only a gust of icy mist behind. Dozens of soul beams fired at his earlier position only to find their target was no longer there. The ape mecha was astonished. It watched helplessly as the giant bear mecha fell from the sky. It was impossible for a mecha to break from a drop at this height, especially with a black mecha's durability. But what would happen if it was frozen? Most likely the mecha would shatter and possibly cause its master inside to drown. The icy mist suddenly froze the mecha's back while it remained transfixed. However, the ape mecha reacted quickly and nimbly turned its body in midair in an attempt to escape. But the icy mist left behind by Wu Zhongkong earlier froze and immediately formed a web of frost. The ape mecha became trapped within the net of ice. This was Frost Song Moon and Skyfrost Slash. The two great soul skills combined and transformed into a translucent sword's reflection. The sword appeared to flash before it disappeared immediately. Wu Zhongkong's figure melted into the icy mist and vanished once again. The ape mecha seemed to pause for a moment in the air, before suddenly splitting in two and crashing down to the ground. It all seemed to take an endless amount of time. In reality, it happened within 2 breaths. The 2 black mechas were brought down from the sky by Wu Zhongkong. This showcased the discrepancy between a mecha and battle armor, and also the difference between an ordinary Soul Master and a Shrek Academy Soul Master. Many more enemy mechas had already arrived when Wu Zhongkong was still fighting. The great battle was in full swing. Close-quarter combat was more frightening than long-range attacks. The best that the Star Luo Empire's Imperial Guards could do was form a line of defense to block the frontal assault, but there were far too few of them to handle all of it. Meanwhile, everyone from the Doluo Continent's diplomatic corps was already exhausted. They were being wounded and killed when the two sides collided with each other. Tang Wulin tore open a car and saved 2 more passengers. Yue had already transformed into the Titan giant ape and held 4 civilians at her sides when she dashed out. She passed them to the Royal Star Luo Academy students before she turned around and rushed back in again. Just then, a purple mecha descended from the sky. The giant sword in its hand slashed right at Yue's face. Though Yue had already transformed into the Titan giant ape, her body size still could not compare to the powerful mecha. Even so, she did not intend to back down when faced with the purple mecha. There was a brilliant flash in her eyes. She flung her fists and brazenly charged at the mecha. Boom! The purple mecha collided with her, its giant sword smashing into Yue's fists. Yue stumbled backward by 2 steps, while the impact sent the purple mecha flying. The Royal Star Luo Academy students were staring in bewilderment. Did she just use her body to physically attack the mecha head-on? She really was a monster. Yue's fists punched out simultaneously when she was stumbling backward. She released 2 air cannon spheres, firing forcefully at her opponent. The giant sword in its hand glowed with a piercing purple flare when it blocked the air cannon spheres. It slashed down with a scorching hot swing, burning brightly. This power was the result of combining a soul master and a mecha. Yue scoffed coldly as the 4th soul ring on her body glowed brightly. Her figure shrank a little, but her muscles appeared even bulkier. She dashed forward boldly and blasted another punch. It was the Devil Titan. Boom! The flare collided into her body and instantly flew in all directions. The terrifying energy fluctuation exploded. The purple mecha and its sword were thrown backward from Yue's punch. This was Yuenan, the powerful Yuenan. Meanwhile, an agile figure silently appeared on the mecha's side. The figure flashed past and vanished. The purple mecha floating in midair suddenly stiffened, dropped down from the sky, and crashed into the ground. Xie touched the tip of his foot against the mecha's body, then he somersaulted through the air and headed for the soul train once again. He did not forget to give Yue a thumbs up at the same time. Yuenan rolled her eyes at him. Her expression was growing more solemn, as there were more than 10 mechas flying in their direction at that moment. There was a black mecha, 4 purple mechas, while the remaining ones were yellow. It was very apparent that the enemy realized that their opponents were not so easy to deal with. They sent their strongest reinforcements straight to them. Shrek Academy's group was not afraid of purple or yellow mecha. However, a mecha that was elevated to the level of black was already completely out of this world. The person who was controlling the mecha was at least a 6-ringed Soul Emperor. The fighting capability of a Soul Emperor with a mecha was beyond one's imagination. Leave the black mecha for me. The rest are yours. A clear voice echoed from within the train. 2 figures were tossed out of the train toward the Royal Star Luo Academy's students, who rushed over to receive them. Soon after, a golden figure soared into the sky to Yue's side. It was Tang Wulin. He had taken a great stride onto the top of the car and leaped into the sky. He flung his hands forward and shot out 2 blue-silver Emperor vines at the black mecha. Feng Linwen was a renowned black mecha master in the Green Skeleton Rebellion. He was 27 years old this year, but he had already achieved a Soul Emperor cultivation base. He was the organization's rising star and was definitely going to become a divine mecha master in the future. He had a penchant for mechas from an early age, having dealt with them every day since he was 3 years old. Most nights he slept in a mecha. It was like an extension of his own body. He began to painstakingly train ever since his martial soul awakened in order to become a powerful mecha master, and he had been learning about operating them ever since he was young. He never took up any kind of profession or even attempted to learn about other sub-professions. Mechas were all the satisfaction he required. A battle armor master was powerful, but he had been thinking, how could a soul master's individual strength possibly compare to the power of technology? Mechas were continuously becoming more sophisticated. He believed that one day they would definitely exceed battle armor and become the strongest of all. At only 26 years old of age, he had defeated most of the rivals he had within the organization and finally gained a black mecha that belonged to himself. There was even that one time when he spent 3 days and nights sleeping in the black mecha. His goal was to become none other than the strongest and most powerful mecha master in the Star Luo continent. He had been working toward this goal all along, and the current operation had been well arranged. The organization wanted to rely purely on power to overcome the other high-ranked officers and raid the diplomatic core of the Doluo continent. The Star Luo Empire was so powerful that it made it a difficult time for the rebellion to survive. They required external forces to interfere and distract the government's attention so they would obtain more time and space to continue their existence. Without a doubt, the Doluo continent was capable of causing the most pressure and trouble to the Star Luo Empire. So, their mission this time was to destroy the diplomatic core from the Doluo continent to trigger a breakout between both continents. The current mission they were on were top secret. Before this day, all communications had been jammed to the point where even a majority of their own had no knowledge of this operation. They used a soul cannon that had radar jamming capabilities to launch a long-range attack, directly bombarding the soul train. As expected, their plan succeeded. However, they did not expect powerhouses to be present amongst the diplomatic corps that were capable of guarding the train themselves. From their insider, they had already gleaned enough information to know that there was a hyper-Doluo within the diplomatic corps from the Doluo continent. Everything else was mostly based on vague information, but they still sent a divine mecha to hold the line this time around. However, the following phase of their operation did not go as smoothly as predicted. After a momentary crossfire, they managed to suppress their opponent with their immense firepower but caused only a limited number of casualties in the Doluo continent's diplomatic corps. A majority of those in the ranks of the diplomatic corps were soul masters with considerable combat capabilities. Along with the reinforcement from the forces of the Star Luo Empire's Mecha Brigade, the attack was unsuccessful. Time and tide wait for no man. The diplomatic corps call for help had already been sent out, and the relief troops would definitely arrive within a short period of time. Although they understood that maintaining their long-range attacks would be more effective, they chose to engage them in close combat to completely eliminate the Doluo continent's diplomatic corps within the shortest possible time. Feng Linwen had already noticed this earlier, that Guu was like to a soul cannon battery. This young girl could shoot out various beams of light from her staff without any amplification from a mecha and had blocked most attacks headed toward them. He then requested to be sent to the front lines and headed straight for that direction. However, as he was about to approach the car, he spread out his arms behind his back, and 2 war hammers dropped into his hands. He relied on the Black Mecha's powerful combat capabilities. Those war hammers were weapons capable of causing mass destruction, making it far more effective than swords or knives on many occasions. The 2 colossal war hammers gave off a dark glow that was as dark as ink after he imbued it with energy. The war hammers then roared across the horizon and landed straight onto the top of the car. However, a figure suddenly appeared on the screen before Feng Linwen's face at this moment. It was a young boy who appeared to be less than 15 or 16 years old. He soared into the sky as he surprisingly released 3 purple soul rings and a black soul ring from his body. He has a 10,000-year soul ring even while he's just a 4-ringed soul master. Feng Linwen was startled. This was the first time he had witnessed such a thing. Then, he saw the black soul ring on the young boy's body suddenly brighten. Vines as thick as thighs shimmered with a dark blue radiance as it precisely surged forward toward his direction. He could faintly see a faint dark golden radiance emanating from within the vines. They seemed like dragons and caused the young boy's figure to shrink rapidly as the vines concealed his figure. What kind of martial soul is this? An arrogant expression appeared on the corners of Feng Linwen's mouth as curiosity got the better of him. No matter how strong his soul rings were, this boy was still no more than a 4-ringed soul master. Feng Linwen was actually a 6-ringed soul emperor. To top it off, how could the opponent possibly be his match when he owned a black mecha? The black mecha from an initial high speed to a screeching halt. Then, the warhammer in its right hand shot out like heavy artillery as it headed straight toward Tang Wulin. Feng Linwen's favorite style of attack was to suppress the enemy through absolute strength. He was a strength system soul master and was most skilled in subduing men through sheer force. The surrounding space seemed to collapse the instant the black warhammer flew out, even causing the air around it to become distorted for a moment and the severely compressed air to give off a light explosion. The vines that were intertwined in front of the giant war hammer seemed weak as it gradually recoiled. However, something shocking happened immediately after. The thick vines that were recoiling suddenly weaved themselves into a large net in the sky. It was true, the warhammer was powerful enough to force the net backward with such sheer force that it even lifted the net to a certain extent. However, its momentum was gradually reduced. The large net moved horizontally as it whipped back and forth. It absorbed and discharged the energy from the giant hammer to endure its forceful attack. Astonishment appeared in Feng Linwen's eyes. His warhammer was not attacking with mere ordinary strength. It was imbued with his martial soul's ability, Shatter. Shatter would activate when one was hit by the hammer, and generally, whoever was at the receiving end would die a tragic death. However, when the warhammer collided into the weaved vines, they clearly gave off a blue and golden radiance. One could indistinctly see meridians and bones within the vines that stripped the giant hammer of its offensive capabilities. It was then that the black mecha waved its right hand to recall the giant hammer as Feng Linwen frowned. Since he could toss his giant hammers in an offensive move, he naturally had the ability to recall them to his soul formation. However, a vine suddenly wound itself around the shaft of his giant hammer, and soon, the young boy he had seen earlier suddenly appeared, swayed gently and flew to the top of the giant hammer with the momentum he got from swinging the vine. The black mecha's pair of giant hammers were about 5 meters long, including the length of its shaft. The hammer's head was more than 2 meters in diameter, so the young boy who somersaulted onto the giant hammer appeared extremely minuscule. The large net of vines unraveled and quickly spread out around his body, like a fierce octopus with countless tentacles. "You trying to get killed?" Feng Linwen scoffed coldly. "You calculative enough to use my very own hammers to approach me? If that's the case, I'll let you approach me." A dark radiance flashed, and suddenly, a 5-meter-tall black figure appeared next to Feng Linwen's black mecha. It was a dark silver giant bear that gave off a dark radiance around its body as its eyes were dyed scarlet. It was the Dusk Silver Bear. Feng Linwen's third spirit soul was also his strongest spirit soul. Although the Dusk Silver Bear could not compare to the Dusk Gold Dreadclaw Bear or the Dusk Gold Bear, it was still an expert when it came to raw strength. Moreover, Feng Linwen's mecha was miraculously compatible with his Dusk Silver Bear. It could rely on its strength and access the 2,500 kilogram pair of hammers equipped by his black mecha. This compatibility made it a killing machine. The Dusk Silver Bear was a spirit soul. The black mecha stretched its right hand out, and the Dusk Silver Bear stepped onto its palm before dashing toward Tang Wulin, who flew back to the top of the hammer like a black orb of light. A prideful smile had already emerged on Feng Linwen's face. The 10,000-year Dusk Silver Bear spirit soul was so powerful that it could tear an opponent into pieces when it came close enough. If Tang Wulin chose to avoid its attack, then it would seize control of the mecha's giant hammers to continue its onslaught in the most violent ways. It would still end in his inevitable death. This was the final battle Feng Linwen would have to directly be involved in before he could finally kill all the soul masters within the diplomatic corps. The Dusk Silver Bear was extremely fast. Its body flashed, and almost instantaneously, it arrived before the giant hammers, already baring its ferocious fangs as it stretched out its enormous paws, making it seem as if it was trying to give a hug. However, it was at this moment that an enormous dark shadow suddenly emerged behind Tang Wulin. This video will end here. Like video and subscribe to my channel.